So first we have Luz Yadira Herrera. Dr. Herrera is a teacher, researcher, author, and co-founder of the Comunidad Collective. She has over 16 years of experience in the education of emergent bilinguals in both mainstream and bilingual settings. She's currently an assistant professor of bilingual education in the School of Education at California State University, Channel Islands. Dr. Herrera's teaching and research are in culturally and linguistically sustaining pedagogy, translanguaging, critical pedagogies, and bilingual education policy. She's a co-author of En Comunidad, Lessons for Centering the Voices and Experiences of Bilingual Latinx Students with Dr. Carla Stania. Next, we have Laura Robb. Laura is an author, teacher, coach, and international speaker. She's completed more than 43 years of teaching in grades 4 through 8, and she returns to teach driving readers each year. She is a keynote and featured speaker at conferences and leads workshops all over the country and in Canada. She also regularly writes articles for education journals and various blogs. She also has a series of podcasts with Evan Robb called the Robb Review Podcast. We're so grateful to have you both take the time out of your busy days to talk about this important topic of building a classroom library with culturally relevant books. This will be a very free-flowing conversation, but for those of you watching, please make sure you use the Zoom Q&A feature below to submit any questions that you might have. I'm going to go off camera now and let the conversation begin, but we'll join back a little closer to 6:30 to wrap us up. Thank you both.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Hi, Laura. It's so great to see you again.
Wonderful to see you again, Luz. And we have a lot to talk about today. You know, maybe the first thing we should really clarify is what we mean by reading the world and why it's important, especially today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sounds great. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, no, if you want to start, otherwise I'll be happy to start. I think the children we teach are global citizens. The world is so interconnected with the internet, with computers, with Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, that we need to prepare our children for having relationships and friends globally, and also working in a global economy and in other parts of the world. And I know you agree with this too, but the best way to do that is through books, because books can take children all over the world, past, present, and future. And they develop compassion and empathy for children who seem different from them, but really there are many likenesses. And then they can communicate and have conversations and relationships with people all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for starting us off. And, you know, I am a teacher educator, as Caitlin mentioned. I'm a professor of bilingual education, and I teach future teachers. And one of the things that we always do to begin class, regardless of the class I'm teaching, usually it's language and literacy, bilingualism, bilingual education, I start with a read aloud. And I usually start with 3 key questions before I begin the read aloud. It is first, what are some themes? What are some topics that you notice across the book? How does the author use language in different ways? And 3, because we're thinking about literacy language practices, right? And 3, how can we use this in a space, in a learning space, right? Which can be a classroom, but it doesn't have to be a classroom because classrooms are not the only learning spaces that we have. And that sort of sets us up for a really nice conversation about the power of books, what we can do, what books can do. Like you mentioned, it really is a way to introduce children to many different things. And one of the things that I talk about a lot in my classroom is about how, and Carla and I talk about this in our work with teachers. Carla is my co-author of En Comunidad. We talk about how they are really amazing entry points to having conversations about social justice issues, right? About things that really matter, what the community might be grappling with, right? And so using books can really help children and young kids process what they're seeing outside of perhaps their classroom doors, perhaps outside of their house or homes or households, right? It's just a really great way to sustain, their various experiences, perhaps their identities, their language practices, etc.
Right, I couldn't agree more. And, I think that Read Aloud should be part of every English language arts classroom, but I encourage content teachers, even a sports teacher, to begin with a poem, which will take, 1 or 2 minutes. What the Read Aloud does is it can introduce children, your training teachers, and then the teachers bring those books into the classroom. But we have to make sure that they are culturally relevant and they represent the world, the community, and our country. Because that's a time when teachers can introduce children and honor different lifestyles that are in the classroom. Like, oh my gosh, the teacher's reading about something I know about. So the Read Aloud is very powerful. It does a lot of good things for literacy, but for me, one of the most wonderful thing it does is it introduces children to possibilities of books that they might read.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what I encourage teachers to do is when they finish a read aloud, that they put it either under the blackboard against the wall or on the blackboard, and children feel free during free reading time to go back and look at the read aloud. They can check it out and take it home. So it becomes more than just a one-time uh, experience in the classroom.
Absolutely. And, Carla and I talk a lot about how we can engage students, or sit with a book across a period of time, right? Because we can read a single picture book, for example, for a different purpose each time, right? Maybe one read, or the first read, could be a focus on identity. Maybe the second read, we can focus on the ways that the author is using language, right? Maybe the next read will be about some of the other topics that are emerging throughout the story. And there's so many different ways that we can engage readers. And actually, Carla and I are working on something, or we've been working on something for a while for Penguin Random House, to create these reading community plans, to guide teachers and educators and everyone that wants to do this, to design a reading community with picture books, middle grade novels, and YA. So I'm really excited about just being able to help educators think about how do we engage children more in participating during, more than a traditional read aloud might allow. So
It should be interactive. They should really participate, definitely. And sometimes, even in middle school, where I have most of my experience, uh, inviting parents to come into the class and experience this interactive read aloud, and come, we would come several mornings before, and I always got the most attendance at my early first period class. But it also shows parents the possibilities of what they can bring to a read aloud. And the read aloud, it builds community, but when you're doing it with your child, it's almost an act of love. It shows how much you care, and that you're sharing this wonderful story and the beautiful pictures with someone that you love. And I think that can be transmitted to children. Yeah, we need to go beyond the I'm just going to read a story and then tomorrow another one. We need to really get the children to think about the story. And that brings me to a very important point that we should both talk about, and that is classroom libraries and access to books. I don't know about your area, but most of the children I've been working with for the last 7 or 8 years have no books at home. They're very poor. Um, their parents work 2 and 3 jobs, so they don't go to the public library frequently. And if we want them to read, you've got to have the ability to access books. So in addition to a school library, I think classroom libraries are something that we really need to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of just to add a little bit to what you were saying though, like, well, I want to add to two things. One thing, I love the idea about, I love this embracing the idea of welcoming families, caregivers into our classrooms, right? And of course, there can be some limitations, especially well, the last 2 years, right? We've had to reimagine the, how we can continue to engage with schooling, and how many people can actually be present in schools varies right now, but that absolutely a way that the parents and caregivers can participate is by coming into the classroom and doing a read aloud, and maybe even doing a read aloud in their home language, right? To share their language practices with the classroom and the school community. But secondly, I wanted to just point out how it is important, obviously, to have access to books, and there's so many different ways that we can get access to books. The classroom library is a key. It's going to be a central part to kids accessing books, but it is important to recognize that our children, and this is something that Carla España and I talk a lot about with teachers and in teacher education spaces, is that our students really do come with a lot of literacy, rich multiple literacy practices that we have to recognize as well, right? So a rich oral history, right? And so how can we think about those and pair them with reading of books as well, right? So thinking about those things. Yeah.
I think children need to share their stories once they're comfortable. And it's nice to have parents come in and share their besides reading aloud, to share their stories. Because what is a book? It's somebody's stories, the stories that they're writing. But if we can also branch out and know that the stories that families tell each other, and we can bring those stories into the classroom, that really becomes very powerful. But what I was also thinking about is that I want children to see the connection between their family stories and some of the stories that are in books. So that's what we need to help teachers do. One of the things that I had worked on many years ago with Alma Flor Ada, I don't know if you're familiar with her work, when we were both very young, was to have parents come in and with their children record their stories and illustrate them, and they created books, and the children traded books. So it's not just books that you purchase in a classroom library, but it's books that the children create that become part of a library. And I think that's very important. So what we're doing is we're taking a traditional view of a library, and we're saying that people can bring part of that library into the classroom. Very, very important.
Yeah,
But
I love that idea because it really helps students see themselves, or children see themselves as writers, which they are, right? And we have to remind them of that. So that's a really wonderful project.
And what happened was, if the parents,
I wonder if you would.
no, well, I'll just finish this. If the parents had limited English, the children would type the story and set it up, and the parents would do a lot of the illustrating with the child. It was just a beautiful experience, and the kids were so proud and felt so honored. But what were you going to say, Liz?
No, and I was just thinking, actually, even the parents can contribute into the books by including their own home languages in the writing of the books. Right. And we're seeing so much of that. I mean, I have a stack of books here that do that, right? That use language dynamically, right? That uses features from English and other languages to tell a story. And I just want a disclaimer though, because we're talking about books here, and there's an empty bookshelf right behind me. I just moved in, so it's not yet bolted to the wall. I'm trying to see where I want it, but my books are all in boxes over here and in the stack over here. But I'm wondering, Laura, would you tell us what are some of your favorite stories that you have, or that you want to share with us?
About families and reading?
Sure.
Okay, well, one of the stories that really happened a while ago, I was working in a middle school with children who had 7th graders who had failed the state reading test. And if they failed it when they were 8th graders, they would not get credit for their high school classes until they passed it. It was a very regressive law that we had in Virginia, really, really sad. And I'll never forget this moment. I brought in boxes of picture books, and I wanted to think, how can I get these kids, there were 20 of them, to share their stories and then to really practice their reading and read books. And I thought there was a primary school a half block away, and I got permission from the superintendent 3 times a week to walk the children over with books and their own stories to the primary school. And each child had a buddy, and they started by sharing their own stories, stories about their families, stories about their hopes and dreams. Um, and then they read picture books. But I'll never forget this 7th grade boy, Richard, when he chose a picture book to practice reading to his buddy, he looked up at me, and these were his exact words: "Mrs. Robb, so this is a picture book." And my heart just broke. I said, "Tell me more about it." I was almost afraid to ask him, "Was this your first?" I just said, I try to keep it like very low key. He said, "I never held a picture book until now." And I said, "Well, you can hold lots of picture books now because we've got cartons of them." And it was wonderful because the young children helped bring those older children into the reading life. They wanted to read those books, and then they would have conversations about them, and then that would lead them to things in their own lives. So that's one of the most wonderful experiences as a teacher with books that I've had. What about you?
Well, a lot of my teaching and teacher education is centered around how we can use children's literature in our teaching. And one of the ways that I do this is talk about, well, we have to think about a topic or a theme, right? And Carla and I do this in our work, a topic or a theme that is culturally and linguistically sustaining to the children that we teach, right? We have to think about the texts that are going to affirm children's identities, their language practices, their ways of being. And of course, we have to think about ways that we can specifically support their translanguaging, meaning how can we create spaces in the learning, in teaching and learning to welcome students' entire linguistic repertoire. So for example, if I want to teach, and this is a really important topic where I'm in Los Angeles in Southern California, and there's a very large immigrant population. I myself am an immigrant. I'm sorry, I'm tongue-tied right now. But one of the topics is immigration, right? And so if I wanted to teach about immigration, of course, I would bring in a book like My Two Border Towns, right? That is a picture book. However, it really explores really complex and important topics like migrants at the border, right? And people who are waiting to get perhaps refugee status or asylum in the United States. And they address this in a picture book, right? When the child is sort of wondering, like, how come my friend can't move back and forth? Why are they still waiting? And the child is sort of questioning and wondering, and the child is also thinking about ways that they can help. And this is by David Bowles, of course, and it's available in Spanish. So when I talk about books that are culturally and linguistically sustaining, this is a wonderful example of one of them, right? Areli is a Dreamer is another one. Also talks about a young girl's, it's an autobiography, talks about a young girl experience as a DACA recipient. And I take every opportunity to let everybody know that Areli Morales, the author, is one of my former students from Brooklyn College. I'm super proud of her. And I just, show my current students like, hey, you can also publish a book, write your story. This is exactly what Areli Morales did. And we have a book in English and in Spanish. So thank you. Shout out to Penguin Random House for creating this platform, for us. And of course, we have the incomparable Gigi Morales, right, with her latest and greatest Bright Star or Lucero that just came out last year, which also talks about immigration in a way that really kids can understand. And it's just a beautiful images that we can learn from. And of course, the classic is Dreamers, also by Gigi Morales, right? That talks about the story of an immigrant mother with her young child. So.
And see, what I tried to do in middle school is to get children, to give them depth into a topic through books. So if we're studying the Holocaust, and when I say Holocaust, I just don't mean what happened in Germany, but the Japanese internment camps were a form of Holocaust, and they happened in our own country. And when the students are studying that, this is a contemporary book, Internment by by Samira Ahmed, and it's about one day in the United States, all the Muslims are rounded up and they're sent to the Japanese internment camps, which are now empty, and they fill them. And it is a very powerful story, and and the kids realize it could happen. So this is the kind of connection that I'm working on in middle school, and I'm hoping teachers are working on in high school. And I'm also bringing in books and reading sections, and I read selections, and then I put them out there for the children to check out. But Greg Howard writes for the LGBTQ community. His first book, Whispers, which I've given to a teacher, is just beautiful. And this is The Visitors. It's a ghost story, but it deals, that takes place on an empty southern plantation that is inhabited by ghosts, and this child is one of the ghosts. And he is involved in someone hurting a friend, and he doesn't remember what he did. So the story begins to investigate that. So what I'm trying to do is bring books into the read aloud, like you're doing with your younger children, and to show them that there are books that they really should look at. But I'm not going to tell them, I want you to read this, but I try to engage them and tempt them. Sometimes I'll use a poem to introduce a book, or I'll read a part and say, boy, if you're interested in this book, it's available. Because, and that brings me to classroom libraries, Luz. A classroom library has to be alive. It's not just books on a shelf. So, and definitely children need choices. And if you don't like the choice they make, too bad. If you say there's, and and kids cannot always read hard books all the time. In my classroom libraries, I have tons of picture books like this, written for that are very appropriate for middle grade, some on much more controversial topics. But what we have to do is bring those books alive in just the way you said that you were doing with your students, and that I want teachers, as the children get older, I want them to do with their students. So I have just, I never keep the books this way with the spine, but on every bookshelf, there are 2 or 3 that are turned out. I have books on windowsills. I'll feature an author or a theme or a topic. Excuse me, and I'll read selections from the book. I don't think it's necessary to read a 350-page book from cover to cover, which a lot of teachers do. It takes way too much time, and you're doing the reading. I want the children to do the reading and know the stories. So, we have to keep it alive. And that's one of the things that I think that we need to help teachers with at all grade levels, K through 12.
Absolutely.
Go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that we kind of check our classroom libraries and see how how they match the children in the classroom, right? Because as we know, Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about books as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, right? And it's important for children to be able to see themselves in books and to see different people's experiences through books, right? So how are your libraries, how are your children, the school community reflected in your classroom library? That's absolutely something that we should definitely be checking for constantly, right? And
Right, I have the teachers who I work with, I have them create a chart of books we want in our classroom library, and it's all student generated. And because what I am hoping for, and you can do this with little children too, because they'll have a favorite book that they can bring in and show you, and you can write it on the chart. Um, that I want it to be our library. Yes, initially I will make teachers make the purchase, or like I have done libraries for Penguin Random House, starter libraries for pre-K to 8. But after those starter libraries come in, I want the children to start making choices of books they want, and it becomes our library. The other thing is that when a library comes in, even whether it's 20 books or 100 or 200 books, I want the children to touch them, to have time to look at them, to and also to set them up. In middle school, I recommend we organize by genre, because that's the way middle school kids choose books. But uh, we have teams looking at books every day for 15-20 minutes and putting them where they belong. And so anytime I get new books in, if I get a windfall, a teacher gets a windfall, I want them immediately to put them in the children's hands. Because if you listen to the talk, they not only talk about the book, but they're also telling stories. We are such a storying people that that the books, bring out stories that the children have of their own, and so what it becomes is a very social experience around books.
Mhm.
And having that space for conversations, which brings me to one more point. We rush children too much
Mhm.
at all ages, because we're always feeling we have to cover the curriculum. I say we have to respond to the children. But I remember when I was a little girl, and we didn't have television when I was very young. The library was my favorite place, the public library. And I had a librarian, she would let me pull like 15 picture books, and I would sit there surrounded by books, and I'd be looking through them to see which 7 or 8 I wanted to check out. I want children to have that opportunity to take their time and look through a book and ask themselves, is this a book I want to read now? Uh, and we don't do that enough. But that in itself it develops literary taste. Um, it shows children how to look through a book and decide, do I really want to read this? And if I don't want to read it, is it okay to abandon it? Yes. When you were growing up, were you allowed to like abandon a book you started? If I picked a book, I had to finish it.
You know what? I'm thinking about this, and I just remember reading a whole lot of different series, like book series. Like I remember the Babysitter's Book Club, like Sweet Valley, which were so different from my own life, but it was appealing. It was fun to read. It was like being in a different. It was sort of like this. I don't know. I guess a window or a sliding glass door for me, right? But it was fun to read, and it was kind of cool to see the next book in the series, which it's always fun, right, to kind of see like what's next in the sort of same theme. But I know that our time is running out, and you mentioned very briefly, Laura, maybe we can wrap this up with this, maybe some comments about perhaps seemingly controversial topics. And we know that across the country, right, there's been a fundamental misunderstanding of what critical race theory is and how it shows up or doesn't show up in our classrooms. And so it's resulted in school districts actually banning some books. Picture books, middle grade novels, YA novels have been on those banned book lists. And so what are your thoughts about that, and what can we do about it?
Well, it's a challenging topic because in the places that are banning books, uh, not only are they harming children and citizens and the books, but they're also harming teachers, because if a teacher brings a book in, they're threatened, and that's a teacher's choice. My feeling is that no book should be banned, that if, like when I would use controversial books in my classroom, I would send a letter home and tell parents, here's a list of 75 books that we're going to be studying, and they've all been banned. If you have any questions, come in and look at them, check them out, and read them. Because what we know is a lot of people who jump on the banned book bandwagon have never read the book, but they hear about it on social media, or a friend said they didn't like the book. Um, so that's one way. It's a very challenging topic. It really is. And critical race theory for middle school, this is the book that I recommend, that you have multiple copies in your class. Um, history, uh, we need to tell the truth. Um, and we can't rewrite books, although unfortunately that's what we're trying to do. But I think those of us, like, I can speak out, you can speak out. Uh, we can support teachers and educate parents about why it's important for their children to read all perspectives, uh, not just one narrow perspective. And that narrow perspective, quite honestly, is going to be white privileged books, the canon, which I have no objection to, as long as you bring in other related books on similar themes that represent the world today, not not the world, 50, 75, 200 years ago. I,
Much. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're interested in learning more about books, and we have so many different resources, like we need diverse books, we have disrupt text, right? Hashtag disrupt text. And thank you to Penguin Random House for publishing stories that matter and representing
yes,
so many different voices. So thank you all as well.
right, yeah. Penguin Random House has been on the forefront, and the CEO has given $500,000 of his own money to work against censorship, which I think is so admirable. And those are the things that are going to catch people's attention and make a difference. So it's wonderful talking to you about all these issues, and I'm
Thank
glad.
you, Laura.
Thank you so much. And we need to keep books alive. And there is scientific research. I would just like to end on this because people wonder. But in 2004, there was a study done by Samuels and Wu, because the National Reading Panel said that all previous studies were not accurate. That they weren't saying that independent reading was bad, but they weren't saying it should happen at school, which it really should. And then most recently, we have a study out of Finland, out of 2,500 children ages 5 to 15. And basically what the studies show is there is a powerful correlation between the amount of independent reading children do and the books and not just books, it could be magazines, lots of other ways of reading, and their growth in reading and reading achievement.
Yeah.
So, we want them to tell stories, but we want them to read as well. And also find their stories in the books, because a lot of our stories we see in the books. When you say we see ourselves, I love that, Luz, because we want to see ourselves. I felt a little bit sad when you mentioned you grew up on the Babysitters Club, and there were, it's true. And, you know, and we have to really understand that. So we have lots of book series now that
Mhm.
represent all different cultures.
I have a couple of these right here, but
Right?
from the Unicorn Rescue Society. I love the series, but thank you, Laura, and thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, really.
Hi, I'm back.
Okay.
Those 30 minutes fly by. Okay, well, thank you both again for taking the time to have this important conversation. It's been a great last 30 minutes. I like we covered a lot, but if there's any last closing things that you guys want to say, feel free to jump in here.
Well, I'm just going to say that I'm so pleased that Luz and Carla have put together classroom libraries for is it all Spanish, English, or it's all different cultures?
Yeah, different language practices that are represented for sure, and identities. So we've curated several sets of classroom libraries and created these reading community guides that are specifically targeting or geared toward teaching bilingual and multilingual children. So we're so excited for it to be out in the world soon. So hope to be able to announce it pretty soon. Thank you, Laura.
Great, great. And right now we have Penguin Random House has libraries that I was so proud to help develop with booklets that go with how to use them for independent reading and instructional reading. So thank you, Penguin Random House, for being on the forefront of knowing that books and our stories matter.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both for helping us in that mission.
Well, thank you. And
All right. Well, the recording of this video should be available on Facebook shortly after this, and we'll make sure to include any resources and links that were talked about today with those recordings, as well as a handout that Laura sent us called Benefits of Teacher Read-Alouds and Students Independent Reading. Yeah, if any other questions come in, feel free to reach out to me or through our social media pages. This is great. I can't thank you both enough for doing this, and I hope you all have a great night.